Hugo Boss Egg, stylized as Hugo Boss, is a designer fashion company headquartered in Metzingen, Baden-Württemberg, Germany. The company sells clothing, accessories, footwear, and leather goods. Hugo Boss is one of the largest German clothing brands, with global sales of about 4.3 billion euros in 2024. Its stock is a component of the DAX. The company's fashion brands are Boss and Hugo. Hugo Boss also sells licensed brand products for children's fashion, eyewear, watches, home textiles, writing apparel, writing utensils, and fragrances. The company was founded in 1924 in Germany by Hugo Ferdinand Boss and originally produced general-purpose clothing. In the early 1930s, Hugo Boss began to produce and supply military uniforms for the Nazi Germany government, resulting in a large boost in sales. After World War II and the founder's death in 1948, Hugo Boss started to turn its focus to men's suits. The company went public in 1988 and introduced a fragrance line that same year, adding men's and women's wear diffusion lines in 1997, a full women's collection in 2000, and children's clothing in 2006-2007. The company has since evolved into a major global fashion house. As of December 2024, it operated 1,532 own retail points of sale worldwide. Early years. After the end of the First World War, Hugo Ferdinand Boss (1885–1948) took over his parents' clothing retail business in Metzingen, where it still operates, and registered it as a business for manufactured goods. In 1922, in 1924, he started a factory for the production of workwear along with two partners, Albert and Theodor Bruchel, as shareholders. The company produced shirts, jackets, work clothing, sportswear, and raincoats. In 1925 and 1926, Hugo Boss, like all Metzingen companies, announced Kurzarbeit for its almost 30 employees. In connection with the global economic crisis following the New York stock market crash of 1929, the company had to reduce its workforce by almost a quarter and file for bankruptcy in 1931. In the same year, Hugo Ferdinand Boss reached an agreement with his creditors, leaving him with 6 sewing machines to start again. In 1931, Hugo Ferdinand Boss became a member of the Nazi Party, receiving the membership number 508,889, and a sponsoring member for Mitglied of the Schutzstaffel SS. He also joined the German Labor Front in 1936, the Reich Air Protection Association in 1939, and the National Socialist People's Welfare. In 1941, he was also a member of the Reichskriegerbund and the Reichsbund for physical exercises. After joining these organizations, he received orders for the production of clothing for the Nazi Party and its organizations, which helped Hugo Ferdinand Boss to stabilize the company again, and his sales increased from $38,260 to $26,993 US dollars in 1932 to over $3,300,000 AA in 1941, though he claimed in a 1934-35 advertisement that he had been a supplier for National Socialist uniforms since 1924. It is probable that he did not begin to supply them until 1928 at the earliest, but was one of the first to produce brown shirts, copies of the Leto shirts, introduced to the SA by Gerhard Rohbach in 1924 rather by chance. The factory was one of numerous smaller manufacturing companies involved in uniform production. Hugo Boss was not involved in the design of the uniform. 1924 is also the year the company became a Reichszeugmeister licensed supplier of uniforms to the Sturmabteilung SA, Schutzstaffel SS, Wehrmacht, Hitler Youth, National Socialist Motor Corps, and other party organizations. By the third quarter of 1932, the all-black SS uniform was designed by SS members Karl Diebitsch, artist, and Walter Heck, graphic designer. The Hugo Boss company was one of the companies that produced these black uniforms for the SS. By 1938, the firm was focused on producing Wehrmacht uniforms and later also uniforms for the Waffen-SS. The end of the 1990s on the situation in the Third Reich was not published by the company. The author, Elizabeth Tim, later published it on the internet herself. Later, the economic historian Roman Kakster conducted an independent study, which was also financed by the company and published by C.H. Beck in 2011. In the same year, the company issued a statement of profound regret to those who suffered harm or hardship at the factory run by Hugo Boss under National Socialist rule, post-war and development into a fashion company. Edit. Hugo Ferdinand Boss died in 1948, but his business survived. His son Siegfried Boss and his son-in-law Eugen Holy took over ownership and management of the company. Production initially focused on uniforms for the French Army and the French Red Cross, then on uniforms for the post office, railroads and police. In 1950, the company received its first order for men's suits, resulting in an expansion to 150 employees by the end of the year. Hugo Boss men's suits first appeared on the market in 1953. By 1960, the company was producing ready-made suits. In 1967, Eugen retired, leaving the company to his sons Jochen and Hugh, who began international development. In 1970, the first Boss-branded suits were produced, and in 1972, the Holy brothers opened the first factory outlet in a nearby warehouse, which later became the Outlet City Metzingen. In 1975, the Austrian designer Werner Baldessarini was hired and eventually became head designer. The Boss brand was registered as a trademark in 1977. This was followed by the start of the company's long association with motorsport, sponsoring Formula One teams, board. In 1995, the company launched its footwear range, the first in a now fully developed leather products range, across all sub-brands. A partnership with the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation was launched in 1995, resulting in the Hugo Boss Prize. In 1997, Littman left the company after differences of opinion with the Marzotto Group, and Baldessarini was appointed CEO in 1998. Women's fashion Hugo Women's Wear was first introduced in 1998, with the first women's fragrance, Hugo Woman, appearing at the same time. Since then, multiple fragrances and skincare ranges have been launched. In January 1999, Hugo Boss launched its first website. Also in 1999, the Boss Orange brand was launched as a separate line for casual wear, followed by Boss Selection 2004 and Boss Green, which emerged from Boss Golf in 2004. 2000 saw the launch of Boss Woman, a product line initially managed by German fashion designer Grit Seymour in Milan, which has since also been presented at Berlin Fashion Week and New York Fashion Week. In 2002, the company was repositioned with a design team at the Metzingen site. The Baldessarini brand was sold to Werner Baldessarini in 2006 and replaced in the Boss range by the Boss Selection collection. Boss Selection was expanded in 2009 to include Boss Selection tailored line, but was integrated into the core Boss brand in mid-2012. In 2002, Baldessarini left the company and Bruno Salzer took over the position of CEO. Under his leadership, Hugo Boss was transformed into a lifestyle group. The women's line was repositioned, and international expansion was driven forward, particularly in the Asian markets. In 2005, Marzotto spun off its fashion brands into the Valentino Fashion Group. In 2007, Valentino was acquired by financial investor Permira for €3.5 billion, which subsequently exerted a significant influence on the Hugo Boss company. Salzer left the company in February 2008. In mid-2008, Permira appointed Klaus Dietrich Lars as CEO of Hugo Boss. Shortly afterward, the company launched an online shop in the UK, followed by other countries. In 2009, the Boss brand was by far the largest segment, consisting of 68% of all sales. The remainder of sales were made up by Boss Orange at 17%, Boss Selection at 3%, Boss Green at 3%, and HUGO at 9%. Also in 2009, HUGO Boss was carved out of the Valentino Fashion Group. From then on, the HUGO Boss stake was held by Primera via its red and black holding. Since a share placement on the stock exchange in November 2011, Primera has held around 66% of the total share capital and 89% of the voting rights in HUGO Boss. In 2010, the company had sales of $2,345, $850,000, and a net profit of $262,183,000, with royalties of 42% of total net profit. HUGO Boss then had at least 6,102 points of sale in 124 countries. HUGO Boss had directly owned over 364 shops, 537 mono-brand shops, and over 1,000 franchisee-owned shops. Since a share placement on the stock exchange in November 2011, Primera has held around 66% of the total share capital and 89% of the voting rights in HUGO Boss. In 2010, the company had sales of $2,345, $850,000, and a net profit of $262,183,000, with royalties of 42% of total net profit. HUGO Boss then had at least 6,102 points of sale in 124 countries. HUGO Boss had directly owned over 364 shops, 537 mono-brand shops, and over 1,000 franchisee-owned shops. In June 2013, designer Jason Wu was hired as artistic director of the Boss women's wear collection. The collaboration ended in 2018. In March 2015, Primera announced plans to sell the remaining shares of 12%. Since the exit of Primera, 91% of the shares have been floating on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and the residual 2% have been held by the company. 15% of the shares are owned by the Marzotto family. Lars left the group in 2016 and the former CFO Mark Langer was appointed as the new CEO in mid-May. In the same year, Coty took over the perfume licenses for HUGO Boss from Procter & Gamble. A realignment took place shortly afterwards. As a result, the Boss Orange and Boss Green lines were discontinued, and only the Boss and HUGO brands remained active. Furthermore, the company's own global prices were adjusted, while unprofitable stores were closed, existing ones modernized, and the e-commerce business was expanded. In 2017, HUGO Boss was also included in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for the first time. In the same year, the sales of HUGO Boss climbed by 7% during the final quarter of the year. In 2020, Mike Ashley's British Frasers Group acquired a stake of around 5% in HUGO Boss. This stake was reduced to 0.63% by February 2023, but Ashley has access to a further 24.69% via financial instruments. In June 2021, Daniel Grieder took over as CEO of HUGO Boss. Under his direction, the Growth Strategy Claim 5 was introduced, with the objective of improving the consumer journey and product offerings, increasing relevance, and driving growth across all geographical regions. This strategy is intended to ensure the sustainable growth of the company. In the same year, Daniel Grieder set the goal of achieving a revenue of €4 billion by 2025, as this revenue target was reached 2 years earlier. HUGO Boss increased the revenue target for 2025 to €5 billion in June 2023. In 2022, Marco Falcioni was appointed creative director. In the same year, HUGO Boss invested in the startup Hygienic LLC, which is developing the cellulose fabric Hygienic. In 2023, the fiber was first used in the company's textiles. In order to meet increased demands, the group invested €100 million in a new distribution building at the Baumland and Fulderstadt site, near Stuttgart. In the same year, the investments were in digitalization and automation, and robotics applications. In June 2023, Hugo Boss opened the Hugo Boss Digital Campus in Gondomar, Portugal. In June 2021, Daniel Grieder took over as CEO of Hugo Boss. Under his direction, the growth strategy Claim 5 was introduced, with the objective of improving the consumer journey and product offerings, increasing relevance, and driving growth across all geographical regions. This strategy is intended to ensure the sustainable growth of the company. In the same year, Daniel Grieder set the goal of achieving a revenue of €4 billion by 2025, as this revenue target was reached 2 years earlier. Hugo Boss increased the revenue target for 2025 to €5 billion in June 2023. In 2022, Marco Falcioni was appointed creative director. The same year, Hugo Boss invested in the startup Hygienic LLC, which is developing the cellulose fabric Hygienic. In 2023, the fiber was first used in the company's textiles. In order to meet increased demands, the group invested €100 million in a new distribution building at the Baumland and Fulderstadt site, near Stuttgart. In the same year, the investments were in digitalization and automation, and robotics applications. In June 2023, Hugo Boss opened the Hugo Boss Digital Campus in Gondomar, Portugal. In December 2024, the Frasers Group increased its stake of directly held shares in the company to 19.25%, after already announcing in a mandatory filing in August that it had raised its share to more than 15%.